Hello everyone, I hope you are doing well. Today I will introduce Xingyi 基本功 or Xingyi basics practice. I will explain why and how to train Xingyi basics. You'd be surprised to know that many beginners and even some long-time practitioners lack this type of information. So let's solve that problem today. As some of you may have guessed already, I will introduce the same topic but for Tai Chi and Bagua in the two following videos. In other words, this is a small 3-video series focusing on fundamental trainings for the 3 internal styles of martial arts. Starting with today's video on Xingyi. But first, let's warm up with Jing commentary and Xiu Dao. Today's sentence is 恬淡为上, a key sentence from chapter 31 of the Jing. In the 30th chapter, Lao Tzu introduced his attitude toward war. He believed that war was an action that violated the Tao. In the 34th chapter, Lao Tzu continued explaining the reason behind his belief. At the beginning of this chapter, Lao Tzu said, quote, 夫兵者不祥之器, 物或物之故有道者不处, end quote. Translation. Foreign weapons are instruments of misfortune. All creatures fear them. Therefore, those who have the Tao do not like to employ them. End translation. In other words, weapons are instruments of fear and are abhorred by those who follow the Tao. Lao Tzu later said, quote, 兵者不祥之器，非君子之器，不得已而用之，恬淡为上，胜而不美. End quote. Translation. Since weapons are tools of misfortune, they are not the tools for a gentleman who used them only out of necessity. Peace and quiet he upholds. Victory he does not enjoy. End translation. So, the key term for today, 恬淡为上, or peace and quiet he upholds, is taken from this sentence. In other words, Lao Tzu promoted the concept of peace and stillness as the ideal choice. Then Lao Tzu continued to illustrate his disgust at war. He said, quote, 而美之者是乐杀人，而乐杀人者则不可以得志于天下矣. End quote. Translation. And he who is pleased enjoys killing people. Now, he who enjoyed killing people cannot get what he desires from the world. End translation. Then, in the rest of the chapter, Lao Tzu used different ways to express his disdain toward war. In Xiu Dao practice, the term 恬淡为上 has been a very popular concept used for thousands of years in China in guiding self-cultivation. Even the first Chinese medicine book, the Huangdi Neijing, or the Inner Canon of the Yellow Emperor, has the same concept expressed by the term 恬淡虚无, or tranquility and nothingness, considered the key factor to maintaining a healthy lifestyle. In the internal elixir practice, 恬淡虚无 is the key concept as well, since it indicates the ideal mental state for a practitioner to utilize in the energy refinement process. One should not use a strong mind in Xiu Dao. In other words, the way to manage 修道 practice is to remain in a neutral state and deal with different energetic experiences and phenomena with a tranquil attitude. It is just another way to express the concept of wu wei or non-action, a key Taoist concept. Technically speaking, a 修道 practitioner should be able to apply the right method in dealing with the yang energy rising phenomenon. Many practitioners cannot maintain a tranquil state when the yang energy rises. So the term 恬淡为上 tells us that one should not try to force the energetic experience before it reaches an ideal level of strength, but instead, one should wait for the 真玄关 or the real mystery gate to open, or the real mystery gate will never be ready to emerge, which is a result of not following the 恬淡为上 concept. With that, let's move on to today's main topic, Xingyi basics practice. Before starting, I'd like to remind you that this video will not teach you any specific movement, but instead give you overall structural information about how to choose the right training materials in Xingyi practice. Some people, especially those who have years of training experiences, will understand this topic better. Hopefully, you can integrate some content introduced in this video into your own training. Topics covered in today's video include: first, what is basics practice in style? Second, what type of exercises are Xingyi basics? 3. Importance of Xingyi basics practice. 4. Key principles. 5th, demonstration, and 6th, takeaways. So, without any further ado, let's get started. Topic 1. What is basics practice in style? Basic practice, or a set of movements that reflects the fundamental requirements of the style, is very important in any Chinese martial art style, both internal and external. The functions of a basic practice are: first, train the body to be ready in terms of flexibility, strength, speed, martial structure, and so on. And 2, break down a complex movement into simpler ones. This involves focusing on challenging movements and treating them as fundamentals. With time, challenging movements will become easier, which is the gradual approach in the training of some difficult movements. So, no matter which function you are aiming to improve through training, basics practice or exercises for fundamentals are the key to making tangible progress in the future. It is worth noting that one of the key bottlenecks or barriers for a practitioner to reach an advanced level is the insufficient mastery of basic training. Sometimes, it's not a quote-unquote difficult movement that differentiates an advanced practitioner from a stagnated beginner, but actually the lack of basics practice or fundamentals. I have lost counts of the real-life examples of this phenomenon I have personally witnessed in my teaching career. So, what is the basics practice in a style? Well, it is the training content that aims to improve the overall and some specific objectives through training. Of course, your teacher should be the one choosing the right practice for you toward this goal. Unfortunately, some teachers only focus on training the routines and neglect important fundamentals. After watching this video, I recommend you check out the training content introduced in this video and compare it with what you have worked on. You may find some areas where you can improve, which is one of the primary motivations for this video. So, what types of exercises are considered Xingyi basics? That brings us to the next topic. Topic 2. What type of exercises are Xingyi basics? I categorize Xingyi basics into 5 categories. They are: first, movements for practicing flexibility; second, for martial structure; third, for martial strength; fourth, movement for speed; and fifth, martial power and energy release. So, any movement and practice that can improve upon one or more of these 5 training objectives can be considered Xingyi basics. Now, let me introduce them one by one. First, movements for practicing flexibility. Flexibility in any martial art training is important. There are 2 approaches to practicing flexibility in martial art practice: the static approach and the dynamic approach. The static approach is through stretching, and the dynamic approach is through working on some movements involving extended structure. One has to begin flexibility training by working on the static approach, for which stretching is the best solution. It is worth noting that Xingyi adopts a natural structure in training and application. Xingyi, a great Xingyi master in history, said that Xingyi does not emphasize stretching. Does that mean flexibility is not important? Not at all. Flexibility is still a very important requirement for any practitioner. What's also important here is to know what Xingyi actually meant. Here, the word stretching used by Xingyi means extreme stretching exercises, such as bending the upper body backward for 90 degrees or more. Xingyi did not imply the common stretching exercises all of us practice regularly. So please do not use Xingyi's word as an excuse to avoid stretching. The second approach to training martial flexibility is the dynamic approach, which is through working on extended movements. There are many martial art movements in any style that can be used for this purpose. For example, the hawk movement with the lower posture can be used to improve the flexibility of the legs and hips. Second, for martial structure. Martial structure practice is an important training category in the Chinese styles. This category also includes 2 approaches, static and dynamic. The static approach is also called 站桩 or standing stance, since 站 means standing and 桩 means stance, a term similar to a big wood stake. I have to tell you that the formal 站桩 practice in martial art training does not have a very long history. 站桩 was derived from Qigong practice as a way to cultivate our vital energy for health maintenance purpose in history. Around 100 years ago, it was gradually adopted by martial artists such as Wang Xiangzhai, the founder of Yiquan, a style derived from Xingyi. The practice of Zhanzhuang was actually an evolution in martial training in history. However, the Zhanzhuang practice promoted by Wang Xiangzhai in Yiquan was rather dynamic in approach and not static as the term Zhanzhuang would indicate. The reason I'm introducing the term here is because Wang Xiangzhai himself used the term 站桩. For example, Yiquan School has the famous proverb, quote, 静中求动叫站桩, end quote. Translation: Seeking the dynamic in the static is called 站桩, end translation. So, according to the Yiquan School concept, 站桩 is a dynamic practice compared to the traditional 站桩 used in energy cultivation and health maintenance. The second type is called 动桩 or dynamic stance, since 动 means dynamic, moving, 桩 means stance or big wood stake. So, 动桩 or dynamic stance is the practice in which a practitioner uses slow motion exercises aiming to train martial structure for combat. There are many movements that can be used to practice the dynamic stance. In Xingyi, for example, the 3T posture can be used as both static and dynamic approaches for martial structure training purposes. I'd like to emphasize again that to an adult, the dynamic approach is more practical and effective in martial art training than the static one. However, to a child, the static approach is more important to practice due to the different benefits provided by these two approaches. Third, for martial strength. Martial strength is important since techniques alone without a strong body may put a practitioner in a dangerous situation in self-defense. I cannot emphasize this enough. For example, in last week's monthly Q&A video, I answered a question asked by a community member about the importance of muscle training in martial art practice. The link is in the description. To train martial strength, you can either utilize martial movements in a bare hand format, or you can also practice it with a device. Traditionally, people use 石锁 or stone lock to improve their martial strength. Nowadays, there are many different types of strength training equipment, such as kettlebells. Personally, I do not use either 石锁 or kettlebells in Canada since it is very hard to find 石锁, nor do I know how to use kettlebells. I use martial art weapons such as spears to train my martial strength, which is traditionally way of Xingyi of training. To train martial strength, a heavy spear or long pole is better since it is different from training a spear technique, for which any spear size suitable for you would be okay. Different martial weapons serve different training purposes, and experienced martial artists know the differences. So, choose the right equipment for different training objectives. 4. Movement for speed. A martial artist needs to be able to execute a martial movement at high speed. Without high speed, a martial movement can only serve form training purposes. Speed training is for combat, and it is one of the key elements in martial skill practice, common to all the martial art styles. I have never seen a style that can use a very slow movement to win a combat. In the case of speed, we have to separate training from application. For example, the internal style for martial arts requires a lot of slow motion practice, but that is only for training purposes, since slow motion practice can help the body remember all the details of a movement or form. But when it comes to the application of those movements, speed is a must. All the martial art movements need to be done fast in self-defense situations, and Xingyi is no exception. Xingyi practitioners can utilize many movements to train martial speed. For example, the wood or bongquan of the 5 elements is often used as speed training. Also, many movements from the 12 animal forms can be used. For example, the swallow form is the perfect option for it. Again, if you practice Xingyi, training for speed is a must. Now, let's move on to the 5th and final category of Xingyi basics practice. 5th, movements for martial power and energy release. Martial power training, Fajin or energy release, is the most important and iconic practice of any style of Xingyi. Traditionally, this part of training is the must-have. Unfortunately, many practitioners in the Xingyi community nowadays ignore this training item. The good news is that more and more Xingyi practitioners outside of China have started realizing and understanding the importance of the Xingyi Fajin, the combination of martial strength and speed. Again, different training approaches are determined by different training objectives. For example, modern Wushu Xingyi performance focuses on fancy movements with no focus on impactful martial power generation. If you are transitioning from Wushu Xingyi to the traditional way, please work on your Xingyi martial power releasing exercise. I really hope all your practices will improve. If so, I would be very happy to see that you have heard my message after watching this video. So, for your own benefit, please practice Fajin when training Xingyi if your former training background is Beijing Wushu style Xingyi. That was a brief introduction to the 5 categories of Xingyi basics. Now, let's summarize the importance of Xingyi basic practice in the next topic. Topic 3. Importance of Xingyi basic practice. Based on what I have introduced so far, you may already have an idea of the importance of basic practice in Xingyi. Any structure we come across in our daily lives needs to have a strong foundation, or else it will be at the risk of damage or collapse. On the same token, a practitioner of any martial style, especially a practical internal style like Xingyi, needs to train in many different martial aspects in order to apply skills and techniques gained through practice. Working on some Xingyi basics or fundamentals is not only a path to further advance the training, but also helps to quickly strengthen martial skills and techniques. So, basics practice not only forms the basis, but more importantly, is simply essential. Furthermore, in your basic practice, you have to know what to practice in order to reach your goal. I listed those 5 categories of training content to give you an idea of what to choose from each category in your journey. No matter what your goal in Xingyi practice is, focusing on basic training is always a necessary step for beginners and experts alike. Personally, I train Xingyi fundamentals every day, and I ask all my students to do the same. I wholeheartedly recommend this approach to all Xingyi practitioners. Now, let me introduce an important practical principle for managing Xingyi basics practice in the next topic. Topic 4. Key principle of Xingyi basics practice. A lot of important principles can be applied in understanding and practicing Xingyi basics. Today, I will only introduce one of the most important ones. Others I will introduce in the future. The key principle of Xingyi basics practice introduced today is 同步训练，逐级递增. Treat each category equally. Build the latter on the former. Each category should be given equal importance in training. It is also important to train each category in order, especially in the initial stages, as every category builds on the former categories. Let me explain. The first step in Xingyi basic training is to work on flexibility. It is the first step because any martial art training is impossible without necessary and sufficient flexibility. However, you do not have to be perfectly flexible before moving on to the next category, since your flexibility will improve when you work on the other categories with time. The next step when working on martial through Xingyi basics training, you will need to work on both static and dynamic approaches simultaneously. This category of exercise requires flexibility practice resulting from the previous step. In addition, some dynamic stance training can also improve flexibility, thus enhancing the practice of the previous category. For category 3 and 4, namely martial strength and speed, both of these are the foundation for Xingyi Fajin or martial energy release, since martial strength and martial movement speed are both necessary for the next step involving category 5, the Xingyi Fajin step. I'm sure you can now see how the 5 categories of Xingyi basics introduced today are closely interrelated. In other words, one category of a practice requires inputs from prior categories of training and also fits back into prior category, thus leading to comprehensive improvement. So, the ideal approach to Xingyi basics is to understand all 5 categories of training content and work on them step by step. With constant practice using this approach over time, your practice is guaranteed to improve. In Xingyi practice, identifying the basic training and working on it in each training session is an effective and efficient way to master this style. Now, let me demonstrate a Xingyi basic exercise to improve Xingyi martial structure. Topic 5, demonstration. Today, I will demonstrate a Xingyi slow motion exercise. It is a variation from Xue Dian's dragon form of Xiang Xing Shu. 象形术 is an extension of Xue Dian Xingyi system, and this exercise aims to build a flexible, natural but strong structure. If you want to know more about Xue Dian and his 象形术, check out my video titled Xue Dian, a Legend, his Xingyi and 象形术. The link is in the description. Topic 6. Takeaways. First, what is the basic practice in a style? Basic practice usually is in the format of a set of movements that reflect the fundamental requirements of the style to train the body to be ready in terms of flexibility, strength, speed, muscle structure, and so on, and to break it down a complex movement into simpler ones. Second, what types of exercises are Xingyi basics? Xingyi basics can be divided into 5 categories. First, movements for practicing flexibility. Second, for muscle structure. Third, for muscle strength. Fourth, movement for speed. And 5, muscle power and energy release. 3. Importance of a Xingyi basics practice. Working on some Xingyi basics or fundamentals is not only a path to further advanced training, but also helps to quickly strengthen martial skills and techniques. Fourth, key principles. The key principles of a Xingyi basics practice introduced today is 同步训练，逐级递增. Treat each category equally. Build the latter on the former. Make sure to check out the demonstration section to get a more visual idea of a Xingyi basics practice. That brings us to the end of today's video. Thanks for watching. See you next time and enjoy your practice.